a very warm welcome to the ESRC Festival of Social Science. My name is Katherine Sugar. I'm a research fellow here at the School of Environment, Education and Development at the University of Manchester. And it's my pleasure to serve as the chair for today's session. I'd also like to give a very, very big thank you to our sponsors. We're honoured to be joined by 4 expert panellists, each bringing a unique perspective. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hello. Thank you very much. Delighted to be here. So thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope we have an excellent part today. Calvillo, again, senior research fellow center in Strathclyde. I'm also part of the EDRC Research Center and working on equity. The equity team, we look at the different challenges of the transition from that equity and justice perspective. One huge part of that will be justice skills, of course, how we make the transition fair for communities and people. On this particular topic, we have done quite a bit of work, both as part of the on the impact of the transition on communities and justice skills across different sectors. In particular, we've done quite a bit of work on low carbon heat transitions, heat pumps and the like. But also, we have done quite a bit of work on industrial decarbonization, linked to, for example, CCUS, carbon capture and storage, also on the transition of renewables, offshore wind, hydrogen, etc. So kind of a little bit of the background here. And how do we define green jobs? Funny enough, this question we often get asked as part of our engagement in projects. I'm talking with people, for example, from communities, from industries. There's a little bit of, I guess misunderstanding is not the right word, but a bit of cautiousness on it, because it always feels too linked to renewable energy. And the point here that it's a lot more than that. Basically, anything and everything could be a green job, depending on how we see it. We call the reason that everything needs to change as part of the transition, and many of the traditional jobs, they're still just alive, and this is important as we move forward. So I think that the main point of this is sometimes green jobs is not a good title or a useful definition, because it moves people up pursuing careers that are very much green. And very simple example, things in the industry, welding, pipeline engineers, things like that. People assume, no, that's all dirty, it's all linked to oil and gas, that's not what I want to do, but actually no, we need that for everything else. For capture of CO2, for example, for hydrogen, for other green industries as well, and everything that else links to the special same. So I think that.
Thank you. And Lisa, would you like to introduce yourself, the work that you do around green job, and also how you would define a green job?
Hi everyone, I'm Venetia Knight. I'm the Director of Environment and Enterprise at Groundwork Greater Manchester, which is a local environmental charity, part of the Federation of Groundwork Trusts. The work we do is around delivering environmental social justice for sort of people, places, and communities in Greater Manchester. So we do lots of different things. We work with lots of different people. My role at Groundwork is about sort of education, employment, and skills, and sort of getting people who are disadvantaged in particular into jobs and careers. And we have a particular focus on jobs for the green economy. I'm also responsible for our landscape contracting business. So I would say I've always worked in the green economy. I graduated from Manchester University 30 years ago with a degree in environmental biology. And university know what to do. It's probably quite common for a lot of students. And just sort of fell into a graduate volunteering program with Groundwork, which I did for 6 months, did a tree planting season self-employed, and then got a contract with Groundwork. And I've done lots and lots of different things over the years. And now one of the directors. The green economy is really diverse. There's all sorts of different sort of jobs, careers, directions of travel, and it changes all the time. And when I started, it was very much about working on environmental application whereas now the focus is very much about climate change and the response to climate change and responding to the nature emergency. So I'm going to read you a definition of a green job. A few years ago, I wrote a careers advisors pack for Manchester City Council to help careers advisors better understand the green economy. So at the start of that, I put in quite a lot of definitions because it's really complicated this world that we live in. So a green job is someone who's employed in a role that directly contributes to or indirectly supports the achievement of net zero emissions targets and or other environmental goals such as nature restoration or mitigation against climate change risks. So it's like that's a big piece. And so green skills are really about the sort of technical skills, knowledge, capabilities, behaviours about delivering that work. So it's kind of a subset of skills that a lot of people will be doing the job, and it's a subset of skills that are about the sort of technical stuff to do with the green economy. So that would be my definition. Might change in a few years. So
Great, thank you so much, Felicia, and thank you for bringing that definition. So Simon, I guess could you tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce your work at the City Council, and perhaps if there's anything you'd like to add to what Christian and Felicia have said.
Hi everyone. Yes, I'm Joos. I'm from Manchester City Council. I lead the city's strategy and policy around the learning landscape. What do I mean by that? Everything from learning for life, recreation, and the love of learning, right through to higher and technical education, and then everything in between. Within the city, we have a designation called the UNESCO City of Learning. You may have seen it, if not, hopefully it'll be promoted over the coming years. Essentially, that is to simplify a way that everybody can connect with learning, that it works for our economy and our business, so that we can create clear pipeline talent. We can encourage our residents, our learners, and our employees to reach their aspirations, whatever that is, that they can be citizens, active citizens within the city, and then we can promote equitable growth. So that's me, my role. And then the movement, in terms of green skills, hands up, who here can actually define green skills, including the panel? Exactly, nobody. So to manage expectations, don't expect anything that is rocket science for myself. You're just not going to get it. But what we can say is that there's almost a culture, and I think that's already been alluded to twice, that every job, every part of modern day living has elements of climate change, net zero, what we are saying green principles within. It's how we actually embed that and how we embrace that. And that is one of my key focuses as part of the learning landscape, how we can do that, recognizing that not all the jobs are there now in a technical sense, but actually the movement and stepping stones, the transferable skills that have that green link, we actually need them to evolve as our economy evolves.
Great, thank you so much, Simon. And finally, Stefan, would you like to introduce yourself, your experience when it comes to green jobs, if you've got anything you'd like to add to the definition of what we think is a green job or a green skill?
Thank you. Do I need the mic or yes? Thank you. Yes. So firstly, thank you for inviting me, for organising this event. And so I'm a Professor of Human Geography at the University of Manchester, where I co-direct the People, Energy and Place Research Centre, and indeed Katherine, Elizabeth and Uttara are members of that centre, as are many of our colleagues who are in both of these centres, EDRC and Joos. And so my interest in this topic is really around questions of retrofit and housing upgrades, and basically the kind of the social life of that. Basically, who does retrofit? How does it happen in our everyday lives? what are the implications for justice in terms of who manages to benefit from these upgrades in the face of the climate crisis, but more generally around the housing crisis. And to a certain extent, I was also inspired by Groundwork in a project many years ago to go into this area. We have many initiatives that are focusing on labour and work around particularly the energy efficiency and housing upgrade element of what you might call green jobs. And speaking about green jobs, I think as other speakers have described this wonderfully, so I don't really have much to add. To me, it's the question of green jobs. Green jobs is like a label, really. They're almost like a marketing label because it's a very helpful one to have to say something's a green job. But indeed, Simon said it really nicely. It's about what they do. It's about how these jobs are actually then manifested, enacted in the economy, in our cities, in our pursuit for a green, whatever that means, right? For low carbon, just transition. So I think that's kind of interesting question for me, because then when we look at what they do and how we might enable them, that definition starts to narrow down, but it's always very contextual. It depends on what you're actually looking at. And I know I don't want to sound too abstract, but I think we're going to have that conversation.
Great, thank you. I think so now that we've kind of had our introductions and kind of defined what we mean by green job and green skill, what I'd like to do now is kind of turn to hear a bit more from the different sectors: research, sort of third sector, policy, local government, and academia. And of course, feel free to kind of chip in wherever you like. Is sort of conversation. But Christian, perhaps I could ask you a few questions first about a research perspective. What do you think are the biggest gaps about what we know about green jobs and what we need to find out, I guess, and that can relate to green jobs and.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent question. I think the biggest gap is that we don't really know much. Quick example of this, and kind of put it another way. The problem is we don't know how many jobs we need. I think that's a very fundamental gap we have. And linked to that, which type of skills we need. There is, of course, assessments, there are analyses. Lots of sectors have done their own thing. Lots of industries and projects have done their own thing, but it's kind of piecemeal and difficult to really understand it. A good example, you might have come across a CCC report a couple of years ago about the just skills for net zero, and they made an assessment and an estimate of net zero will produce anything between 100,000 jobs and 700,000 jobs. So the range is so huge that it's very difficult to make any plans or any kind of steps to tackle that, because are you actually preparing for 100 or for 700? It's a very different set of activities you need to do that way. So yes, I think the biggest fundamental gap here is we don't really know exactly how many people we need, where we need them, when we need them, and with which skills. That, of course, we find analyze as part of the research we do. It's complex, it's difficult, takes time, but it's important, and that's why we try to work in this type of projects. Just a final point of that as well to keep in mind, which is part of the challenge. The analysis we have at the moment, again, sectoral or otherwise, they're all two different methodologies, different assumptions, different kind of ways of doing. So it's very difficult to put together, and that's the problem that many assessments and politicians do, like they just add them up. But we forget that we're probably all doing the same people. So when you see a policy statement that says, oh, this will create 50,000 jobs, that assumes that 50,000 people exist, they're fully trained, they're fully available. It's likely to not be the case, so that's going to be a huge challenge as well.
Great, thank you. I guess moving on from your, you're talking a bit about your research, and it's really nice to hear you kind of. It'll be really interesting to hear a bit more about what kinds of green skills you think are most in demand according to your research. How do you have that available?
I think all of them. No, but that's what that's a silly answer. But the idea is the more we talk with people in different sectors and different things, some of the more basic skills, kind of electricians, plumbers, anything to do with construction, very huge demand and it needs to be because and it goes back to the question about the green, what green is and what it isn't. It's not about the offshore wind farm engineer that is on top of the wind turbine only. It's about everything else that makes that happen, which could be the people that lay the pipelines, the cables, the foundations. There's an awful lot of things that needs to be done. And again, it's not only about the offshore wind, but it's also the roads we need to produce, the hospitals, the schools, and everything else. So anything to do with kind of all those basic manufacturing and basic kind of construction stuff. Usually.
Great, thank you. I guess I have a policy question since you work for the Centre of Energy Policy. I can process you now, maybe move on to it a bit later. So since you work for the Centre for Energy Policy in Strathclyde, what policy changes would help green jobs and skills in your opinion?
Very fundamental one is coordination. Just until like very recently, there was no an industrial plan, and the one we have now is not bad, but I guess a little bit better. But there was not an industrial plan for like decades. So that's I think what there is. But also you have very kind of separated organizations on the both nations, each on trying to do their thing, and that again creates a problem. Sectors they have a plan for skills, but it's again the sector is still so coordination is I think that's the one thing that could have a massive impact on how we deal with this. And again, it's not only about what the industry side needs or the sector needs, but also linking to education, for example, because everything needs to work together, coordinating, because the colleges needs to be there to them, and the jobs needs to be there as well. So there is kind of a pipeline of people and routes into careers that is not there.
Great, thank you so much. I think we'll move on to talking to you, Nisha, from the third sector perspective. And you very kindly introduced to us what Groundwork do in this space. And I guess the first question to kind of kick us off is, what role do you think community organisations can play in?
There's kind of two aspects. I think there's like there are a lot of third sector organisations like Groundwork who work in the green economy, who particularly kind of what you might think is more traditional green jobs. So that might be natural environment, kind of land-based sectors, environmental charities, things like Wildlife Trust and National Trust, who are on the ground and known and trusted for doing things, and they have a really good reach to be able to engage people, talk to people, and build pathways and careers, that sort of training, job opportunities. So they're a really good sort of starting point, and I guess a sort of a place of trust for local sort of residents, and as well sort of community organisations on other organisations who are not necessarily sort of specialists in this field, if they have a level of knowledge and information so they can provide advice, signposts and guidance. Because I think a lot when we talk about sort of green skills, green economy, net zero changing, it's kind of uncertain. We know that there needs to be a lot of change. We need everybody to get on board. We need people to be able to live their lives differently, to embrace different technologies. But that means bringing a lot of people along with us. And I think that the sort of the sectoral community organisations have got big roles to play within that. Because people need to have reliable sources of information, and to be able to get good advice and know who to ask. And I think at the moment that is quite difficult for people to sort of consider a career or getting started in this environment. If you know anything about kind of careers advice, it's not great. It's not great. And people tend to fixate on sort of certain career pathways that they're familiar with. I wanted to be a vet when I was growing up as well, like animals. But people will often sort of think about things that seem familiar, but that's not actually where the direction of travel for the economy. It's not what industry needs. And there is just, it's like if you look at the NHS, there's 237 different jobs, but most people know about doctors, nurses, physiotherapists. So how we sort of provide information to get people to be able to make the right decisions. And if you're thinking about education, I don't know how many of you are students, got lots of debt to think about. You want to make sure that you're making the right decision about choices that you're making, that any investment you make personally, whether that's in money or time, is well spent and is going to pay back in the future. So I think that the third sector have got a role to play in that. They need to have access to the right information to be able to provide that function.
Great, thank you. I'm really glad that you brought up the sort of barriers. Perhaps really my next question is the sort of barriers that people might face in the communities that you work with when trying to access employment. And you kind of already mentioned the very important one. Perhaps you can expand on that or give some.
Yeah, so that sort of good quality, consistent and reliable advice is one of the biggest barriers. And when people are trying to make, younger people in particular, thinking about what direction of travel they're going to go in with their career, where do they get that information from? Who influences them? So that's often parents and carers, their peers, might be social media or something. But how they sort of get the right advice is really difficult. And I don't think necessarily the profession, where they might go for professional advice, is necessarily that well informed about the subject. So I think that, we have to invest in that area of training and development. Our education, our skill system in curriculum is really complicated. And it is really hard to navigate what to do. So from when people are making choices in school or when they're taking steps and how to go from one thing to the next thing, it really isn't clear. And government, society, we've got a job of work to do to make those changes. So I think that those are sort of big things. I also think there is quite a lot of challenge around misunderstanding or perception of the green economy. When we sort of talk to people in the past, they think it maybe is quite traditional. I know you sort of talked about it being around, energy, but our perception is that people think it's perhaps more just land-based or, ranges or conservation, that kind of thing. Or they might think it's poorly paid, or it's dirty work, or it's not for me. People also may not see themselves within the industry and can sort of see that within sort of certain trade roles or engineering roles where it feels like it's just for a certain kind of group of people and it's not particularly open or people can't see themselves in it. So it's that kind of challenge about getting more women into sort of trades or engineering roles, for example. So there's a lot of issues about not knowing about information, the system being really difficult to navigate, and people's perceptions about it that maybe they've made up their mind before finding out about it in the first place.
Great, thank you. And you mentioned before about not leaving anyone behind, and I think that's something that is really, really important when it comes to the green transition. So I was just wondering what your opinion is on how can we really ensure that green jobs are available to everyone, including those from more marginalised communities.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I think that the sort of the green the transition to a low carbon economy and potential means that there could be we should be seeing good quality jobs, good jobs everywhere and working at different levels. The opportunity is massive, but people risk being left behind because of this sort of the stop-start nature of things, level of uncertainty. So not being a scratch record, really good careers in education, information and advice and guidance is really important, and thinking about how we reach people and talk to people. Going downstream and making sure that we're getting really good information into schools, in all schools, so that we're kind of inspiring people, giving them opportunities to engage in different services, meet different employers, meet different sectors, find out, ask questions. But it's up to us to work hard to sort of get that information out to people, and sort of working more at a community level to sort of build sort of trust and engagement in places, and designing and delivering specific sort of programs and interventions. So at Groundwork, we've often delivered sort of waged employment programs which reach, say, young people who might have been out, even not struggled in education, or we go into prisons, or we sort of go to particular communities where they face disadvantage to bring jobs and careers to people so they can get started and help them move on. So it sort of breaks that kind of gap around not having an opportunity, not having experience, not understanding about things. But it's doing that kind of quite tailored kind of working and showing people that yes, they can progress. You don't necessarily have to be really good at science, or you don't necessarily have to be able to do certain things. But there are so many different careers. There should be a pathway for everybody who's interested.
Great, thank you so much, Felicia. And Simon, you work for the Manchester City Council. You kind of already mentioned, but I'd be interested to hear a bit more that, well, really what Manchester City Council is doing. And if there's perhaps any particular sectors that you're focusing on or that you're targeting.
Before I answer that, just if any of you are expecting a very confrontational panel, I don't think we're going to get it. I think we're going to be very in line with our thoughts, and there's nothing I disagree with so far. But I have been making a couple of notes, and hopefully they'll come full circle back into what the City Council is doing. And so Manchester is convening the Climate Change Action Plan, which is 2025 to 2030. It is trying to be an outward-facing, collaborative movement. But how many of you are aware of the net zero ambition for 2038? Just hands up. Right, that is very stark for me. About 2 people. So for me, that smacks of that the level of consultation, the level of engagement, the co-design, the co-journey, when we actually strive to achieve that collectively, isn't working right now. As a city council, we are making some big changes, and we are trying to lead by example. And I say we, as a role, we've got over 7,000 members of staff, so I'm a cog within a much bigger machine. But we're trying to transition about 25% of our fleet into electrical vehicles. We are looking at scaling up our heat pump provision. We are committed to climate change in terms of the training being citywide. Under the UNESCO movement, we are working alongside the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, with them always aligned back into what we're trying to do across 100 projects. So it is there, but I would say that there's a lot more that needs to be done. We just referenced the community. How do we engage the community? How do we bring business leaders? How do we bring community organisations along with us? Well, quite clearly, if in the room we're not clear on what's being done, what the ambition is, we're not going to reach it. The quick wins for the 2038 net zero ambition, I would say, have already been exhausted. Now we have some real significant challenges, and this is me being fairly critical. Now, if we're not applying ingenuity, innovation, collaboration, using every asset that we have at our disposal across the city, then we're not going to reach it. It's as simple as that. So, yeah, in terms of some of the other elements, you referenced careers education, completely agree. But I made a note when you mentioned before about if we can't even map what green skills are, after we can't even define what green skills are, my actual role is to work across the learning ecosystem to try and create a pipeline of talent that's fit for our economy. Well, if we can't define it, we can't map it, how are we going to create a pipeline? We just can't. It's as simple as that. So there is a lot more work that needs to be done, and that can only be achieved through collaboration.
Great, thank you, Simon, and thank you for being so honest, really, providing a bit more of a critical perspective. So I think we'll move on to Stefan now and talk a bit more about the education sector. Of course, you have already spoken a bit about But Stefan, you're a professor at the working in higher education for a very long time, I imagine. I was wondering if you think universities, colleges, and other educational institutions are adapting quickly enough to meet the demand for green skills. And also, again, alongside that, if they are or they're not, what kinds of educational programs are needed to prepare people for green jobs and green skills?
This might work, by the way, so I can take that one. There you go. Yeah, let's slow down. Yeah, now? Yeah. Yeah, so I have a short answer to that, no. I don't think, as a whole, that the university sector is there in terms of either the educational or the research element to this. Things are moving quite fast, and they are moving. My impression is they've been moving faster in the last few years than before, and they've been moving faster partly because of the broader crisis that higher education is experiencing in this country, which of course is a different subject. But certainly that crisis, along with I think what other panelists were saying, has prompted higher education providers, just simple other education providers at the tertiary level, like further education as well, and to think of more creatively about what they can do. For me, and this is kind of my pet peeve, I think we are not doing enough to stitch together the different, as higher education, but I think more broadly, to stitch the different silos or agendas that concern all of this whole area of green jobs. Because green jobs, from what I see them, and I appreciate what you were saying there, Christian, about all the technical elements, which is great, but there is, and sorry to sound like the social science advocate in the room, but there's a lot of social engaged green jobs that happen in the community that are also green jobs. So even if someone comes in to help you deal with your energy bill, that is a green job. Even if there is someone helping you, and I'm talking about the energy sector, and I'm not comfortable to go into other areas, but even if someone's helping you find an installer for your installation, not the actual installer, but the person who mediates between you and the installer, that's a green job as well. So there is a whole, I mean, this is kind of what Groundwork is doing, a lot of what the work is, and there's lots of these providers in the third sector. And there's also work that's happening outside of the third sector, informally. There's informal green labor. It's that kind of me helping you with, in a reciprocal or friendly, relationship, or whatever kind of social relationship at an individual or community level. Me helping you out with something around how you use energy or other infrastructures in your home, and vice versa. There's that element, that's exchange of knowledge, materials, practices that happen inside community that is not actually recorded anywhere. And this work is often, well, it has its own demographics. It's kind of precarious. It's not people necessarily who are formally employed or necessarily have the formal skills, but they still do it. So what I'm thinking, right, okay, there's all of this that's happening, all of this more formalized training, but I'm thinking if we linked up our agendas around community engagement, social responsibility, and green skills and green jobs into one, we could do a lot more and much more interesting work inside communities. I'm thinking, what if there was on your high street a kind of a repair cafe that was also a place that provided retrofit advice and also provided skills training around green jobs? Where is that sort of front-facing, street-level engagement that could happen around this. Because the scale of the challenge we're facing, and I guess that's where the problem lies, right? Scale of the challenge we're facing around climate and energy and sustainability is immense. We have to recognize that we are living mostly in homes where we're just throwing money down the drain to keep these homes and to light them and to provide the energy services that we need, because they could be so much more efficient. They could be so much more environmentally friendly, but also much more economically affordable. And we could be doing that with benefits not just for us in terms of our own financial benefits, in terms of not having to spend so much on energy, not in terms of the climate, in terms of the energy demand, but also in terms of jobs and community revitalization. And I don't know how we're not gotten yet to that stage where we're linking all of these things up and we're thinking, what can we actually do in communities on the ground, and how can we focus our training, not just on all of the things that we're already starting to do, like continue professional development and certificates and what have you, and all kinds of training programs that might be already in degrees and so on, but actually that kind of street level, everyday community training.
Right, thank you. Alicia, did you want to comment on that?
We call that community hub.
Yeah.
It's one of our initiatives around having kind of a one-stop shop, but providing advice and information, which then has tentacles reaching out into communities for community activists, residents, retail action around a range of issues to sustainability in the green space, green lifestyles.
Great, thank you. Christian.
Just a quick one. And yeah, I mean, data stuff absolutely can man, but not to say that all this social side of things is not important. It's just as important. And it's kind of what enables everything else to happen. So we really need these people as well, and having that advice that need around community level or and legal as well.
Great, well, I'm afraid that brings us to the end of our session today. So thank you so much, first of all, to our panel members.